In this lesson, we're going to talk about the 3 keys to moving your church forward. If you want to establish a culture in your church where you truly are winning, you truly are accomplishing your mission of helping people pursue God, which we think means that you've established a culture of discipleship in your church, in your families, in your small groups, in your youth ministry, in your kids ministry, all this kind of stuff. If you really want to do this well, we think it's not that difficult, but you need to fully understand these 3 critical keys. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, first thing you need to know is this. The most critical role in the church is the role of the overseer of your discipleship or your shepherding ministry. We're talking about not the teacher necessarily, not the guy who preaches every week. Not that that's not important. It's very important. We'll get to that. But the most critical role is whoever that person is, or those people, whoever that person is that is overseeing the discipleship culture at your church. Now, we think that that person should be called the pastor. That's what we do. We call that person the pastor. That is truly what a pastor is all about. A pastor is someone who is shepherding the people. A pastor is someone who is overseeing the shepherding ministry at your church. Now, again, it might be a pastor who's in charge of that, but he should have leadership over a team of overseers. All of that organizational stuff we'll get into in our lesson resources for this lesson. But what you need to understand is that person, whoever that is the most, hands down, the most important person to making sure that your church moves forward. Here's the second thing you need to know about this, and it's that the pastoral ministry cannot be fulfilled by a single pastor. You know, even though if there is one guy in charge of this, if you call him your lead pastor, your campus pastor, your small group ministry, whatever you call this guy, doesn't really matter what you call him. He cannot do it by himself. If you're the senior pastor trying to do this by yourself, you cannot do this by yourself. It's biblical. Check it out. Exodus 18:14. Moses was in a situation like this. His father-in-law saw all that he was trying to do for the people. You know, he was trying to be the sole leader, the main guy for all of the people of Israel. And Jethro said, "Why? What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening?" I mean, obviously what was happening here, and the point was Moses didn't have any organization behind it. He hadn't thought about it at all critically. And maybe for you or your leadership team, you're in that same place where you haven't really thought about this organizationally. And that's a real problem because like Jethro says, you're going to burn yourself out. Look what he says there in verse 17. This isn't good. You're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to wear the people out too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. And so Jethro had some practical advice, and it says in verse 14, Moses listened to the advice, and he followed his suggestions, and he chose capable men from all over Israel, and he appointed them as leaders over the people, and he put them in charge of groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. Now you can go back and read more about that in Exodus 18, but the point is that he started to organize his people to move forward. He started to organize them so that they could really win. And leaders and vision teams and elder teams, you need to understand this. It's so imperative that you organize your church to help them move forward. And this is exactly what we see in Acts 14, verse 21 in the New Testament. It says, after preaching the good news in Derbe and making many disciples, Paul and Barnabas returned to this area, Lystra, Iconium, Antioch of Pisidia, those were in Galatia, and he strengthened the believers there, and then they encouraged them to continue in the faith, and they reminded them about suffering many hardships. But look at what it says in verse 23. Paul and Barnabas did this before they left. They appointed elders in every church, and with prayer and fasting, they turned the elders over to the care of the Lord in whom they had put their trust. So see, they're taking a page out of Moses' book. They're starting to organize because they know they're not going to be there forever. They're starting to organize the church there in Galatia so that it could move forward. And this is exactly what we need to do. And here's what we think is most important. Here are the 3 keys as far as your organization. The 3 key meetings every week are these: family devotionals, small groups, and mentoring relationships, mentoring meetings. Now, maybe you look at that and you say, what are you talking about? I mean, what about the overseer meeting? What about the meeting we're having right now? What about our key leaders? What about our staff meeting? What about all these? All of those meetings are important. I'm not saying they're not important, but all of those meetings should be all about equipping and empowering these three key meetings. Again, family devotionals, small groups, and mentoring, because these are the environments where people are going to share the truth in love. Parents are going to share the truth in love to their kids. That's important, church. We need to make sure that we're catalyzing that relationship. Small group leaders are sharing the truth in love in their small groups. And mentors then, that's that extra step, that extra level where people are going even beyond small groups to share the truth in love with one or two or three people. That's what a mentoring relationship. Some people call that discipleship. We just call it mentoring to make it easy for people to understand. Those are the three key meetings in your church every single week. Look at what it says in Ephesians chapter 4. It says, now these are the gifts that Christ gave the church. He gave them apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers, and he's basically listing out all the staff members there, so to speak. But look at what he says in verse 12. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do this work and build up the body. Church leaders, pastoral teams, vision teams, whatever you call it at your church, your job is to do what Moses did. Your job is to organize, to equip and empower, and make sure that you are equipping and empowering these three key meetings, which means this, that the three most important positions in the church are parents, small group leaders, and mentors. Because these are the people who are accomplishing your mission. These are the boots on the ground. It's not your teacher, it's not your preacher, because your preacher, there's no way your preacher can personally shepherd, can personally pastor all the people in your church unless you have a church of 2 or 3 families. Other than anything larger than that, you better have some organization and structure behind it. And then the key leaders, the paid leaders in the church better be all about equipping everyone else to do the ministry. This is what Jethro was telling Moses. This is what Paul is telling us in Ephesians 4 and what we see modeled in Acts chapter 14. And you read it for yourself everywhere else in the Bible. If you want to have a church that's really moving forward, make sure that you focus on these 3 key things.